The morning mist clung to the ancient towers of Valdoria Castle, like secrets waiting to be unveiled. Queen Isabella Montrose stood at her chamber window, watching the sunrise paint the kingdom in golden hues. At 35, she possessed both the wisdom of experience and the sharp intuition that had served her well during her 10-year reign alongside King Alexander. Today felt different. There was an electricity in the air that made her skin prickle with unease. The servants moved with unusual haste through the corridors, their whispered conversations dying abruptly whenever she approached. Even her lady-in-waiting, Maria, seemed nervous during the morning routine. Isabella had learned long ago that a queen's survival depended on reading the subtle currents of palace life. Every glance, every pause, every change in routine could signal danger. The crown had taught her that paranoia was not a flaw but a necessity. Lord Marcus Blackwood, the king's most trusted advisor and childhood friend, had been acting strangely for weeks. The man who once shared every thought with the royal couple now seemed guarded, his eyes darting away when she tried to engage him in conversation. His late-night meetings had become more frequent and his explanations more vague. The queen descended the grand staircase, her silk gown rustling against the marble steps. The portraits of her predecessors watched from ornate frames, their painted eyes seeming to follow her movement. Each had faced their own challenges, their own betrayals. Isabella wondered if any had felt this same gnawing sensation in their stomach. Captain Thomas Hartwell of the Royal Guard stood at attention near the throne room entrance. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles fought in service to the crown. Isabella had always trusted Thomas implicitly. He was one of the few people in the palace who served the monarchy rather than their own interests. "Your Majesty." Thomas bowed as she approached. His voice carried an urgency that made her pause. "Captain, you seem troubled this morning." Thomas glanced around the corridor, ensuring they were alone. "Majesty, I must speak with you privately. There are matters of grave concern that require your immediate attention." The queen's pulse quickened. In all her years of knowing Thomas, she had never seen him this agitated. The man who faced down enemies without flinching was genuinely afraid. "Meet me in the rose garden in 1 hour," she whispered. "Take the servants' passage." The rose garden had always been Isabella's sanctuary, a place where she could think without the weight of a dozen watching eyes. The ancient roses, planted by queens centuries before her, bloomed in defiant beauty despite the approaching winter. She found Thomas waiting beside the fountain, his uniform immaculate as always but his expression grave. "Majesty, what I'm about to tell you will shake the very foundations of your trust," Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've discovered evidence of a conspiracy against King Alexander, and I fear Lord Marcus is at its center." Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Marcus had been Alexander's friend since childhood, his advisor since they were both young men. The idea that he could betray them seemed impossible, yet Thomas was not given to wild imaginings. "What evidence?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thomas produced a leather pouch from his coat. Inside were several documents, their seals broken, their contents damning. "I intercepted these messages 3 days ago. They detail a plan to remove the king from power during the upcoming harvest festival." Isabella's hands trembled as she read the carefully coded language. References to the sleeping lion could only mean Alexander. Mentions of the Golden Dawn aligned perfectly with the festival's timing. Most chilling were the signatures at the bottom of each document, bearing Marcus's distinctive seal. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. "From what I can gather, months, perhaps longer. The conspiracy involves several nobles, foreign agents, and even some members of our own guard." Thomas's voice carried the weight of his disappointment. "They plan to make it appear as an accident during the tournament." The Harvest Festival was Valdoria's greatest celebration, drawing nobles and commoners alike to witness tournaments, feasts, and ceremonies. The idea that someone would use this joyous occasion for murder made Isabella's blood run cold. "Who else knows of this?" she asked. "Only you, Majesty. I couldn't risk word reaching the conspirators before I could warn you." Isabella paced among the roses, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. If they moved too quickly, the conspirators might accelerate their timeline or flee the kingdom. If they waited too long, Alexander might die. "We must be incredibly careful, Thomas. If Marcus suspects we know, he'll either disappear or strike immediately." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Lord Marcus himself appeared at the garden entrance. his usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled. His dark eyes swept the garden before settling on the Queen and her guard captain. "Your Majesty, I've been searching for you everywhere," Marcus said, his voice carrying its usual smooth charm. "The king requests your presence in the war room. There are urgent matters requiring your attention." Isabella felt every muscle in her body tense. Was this the beginning of their plan? Had Marcus discovered their meeting? She forced a smile, drawing upon years of courtly training to hide her fear. "Of course, Lord Marcus. Captain Hartwell was just updating me on security arrangements for the festival." Marcus's gaze lingered on Thomas for a moment too long. "Excellent. Security is paramount, especially with so many foreign dignitaries expected to attend." As they walked back toward the castle, Isabella caught Thomas's eye. He gave the slightest nod, confirming her suspicions. Marcus was indeed watching them carefully, his behavior confirming the truth of the intercepted documents. The game had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. Isabella knew that the next few days would determine not just her husband's fate, but the future of Valdoria itself. The conspiracy was real, the danger immediate, and she was perhaps the only person who could stop it. The castle doors closed behind them with an ominous finality, and Isabella stepped into what might be the most dangerous performance of her life. The war room's heavy oak doors shut with a resounding thud that seemed to echo through Isabella's very soul. King Alexander stood hunched over the massive table, studying maps and documents spread across its surface. At 42, he still cut an imposing figure, his broad shoulders and commanding presence filling the room with natural authority. Yet Isabella noticed something she had missed before: the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed nervously against the table's edge. "My love," Alexander looked up as she entered, his blue eyes brightening with genuine warmth. "Marcus says there are concerning reports from our border provinces." Lord Marcus positioned himself strategically near the window, his dark figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. Isabella felt his calculating gaze upon her, studying her reactions with the intensity of a predator. "Indeed, Your Majesty," Marcus interjected smoothly. "Our scouts report unusual troop movements along the eastern border. Prince Victor of Blackmore appears to be positioning his forces for potential aggression." Isabella's mind raced. Was this intelligence genuine, or was Marcus fabricating external threats to distract from his internal conspiracy? The Kingdom of Blackmore had been a traditional rival, but recent years had seen relative peace between the nations. "What evidence do we have of Prince Victor's intentions?" she asked carefully. Marcus produced a scroll bearing official seals. "Intercepted correspondence, Majesty. The prince speaks of reclaiming ancestral lands and settling old scores." Alexander frowned deeply, his warrior's instincts immediately engaged. "If Victor means to test our resolve, he'll find Valdoria ready to defend herself. How soon can we mobilize the eastern garrisons?" "Within a fortnight, Your Majesty," Marcus replied. "However, I recommend we consider diplomatic solutions first. Perhaps a show of strength during the harvest festival, display our military might to demonstrate Valdoria's readiness." Isabella's blood chilled. Marcus was weaving the conspiracy directly into his advice, suggesting that Alexander make himself vulnerable during the very event where the assassination was planned. Surely such displays might provoke rather than deter, Isabella suggested gently. "The harvest festival is meant to celebrate peace and prosperity." Marcus's eyes flashed with barely concealed irritation. "With respect, Your Majesty, Prince Victor understands only strength. A demonstration of our military capabilities might prevent the need for actual conflict." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus speaks wisely. We cannot appear weak when faced with external threats." Isabella felt trapped between revealing her knowledge and protecting her husband from immediate danger. Every word Marcus spoke was carefully calculated to push Alexander toward the conspirators' trap. "Perhaps we should consult with Captain Hartwell," Isabella suggested. "His tactical experience might offer valuable insights." "The good captain is capable, but this requires diplomatic finesse beyond a soldier's training," Marcus replied dismissively. "I have already begun preliminary negotiations through back channels." The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus skillfully guiding Alexander toward decisions that would place him in maximum danger during the festival. Isabella played her part, offering gentle suggestions while avoiding anything that might reveal her suspicions. When they finally left the war room, Isabella's head was spinning with the complexity of the deception. Marcus had painted a compelling picture of external threats while simultaneously engineering internal vulnerabilities. The man's intelligence was as dangerous as his treachery. That evening, Isabella found herself alone in her private study, a sanctuary filled with books, correspondence, and the artifacts of governance. She had sent word to Thomas through Maria, requesting another clandestine meeting. The weight of knowledge pressed down upon her like a physical burden. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Maria entered carrying a tea service, her movements quick and nervous. "The tea you requested, Your Majesty," Maria said, but her tone carried an odd emphasis on certain words. Isabella understood immediately. Hidden beneath the tea service was a message from Thomas. As Maria poured the tea, Isabella palmed the small scroll and tucked it into her sleeve. "Thank you, Maria. That will be all for tonight." Once alone, Isabella unrolled the message. Thomas's careful handwriting revealed disturbing new intelligence. 3 more guards compromised. Festival security severely compromised. Foreign gold funding conspiracy. Trust no one except those we have specifically verified. Meeting tomorrow dawn. Old chapel ruins. Isabella burned the message immediately, watching the flames consume the evidence. The conspiracy was larger and more sophisticated than they had initially realized. Foreign involvement suggested this was not merely a domestic power struggle, but possibly an attempt by Blackmore to destabilize Valdoria from within. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through possibilities and plans. By morning, she had formulated the beginnings of a counter-strategy. Though its success would require extraordinary careful timing and flawless execution. The old chapel ruins lay a mile beyond the castle grounds, hidden among ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of Valdoria's history. Isabella rode there alone before dawn, her horse's hooves muffled by fallen leaves. The crumbling stone walls held memories of prayers and secrets from generations past. Thomas emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his usually immaculate uniform replaced by plain clothes that would not identify him as a member of the royal guard. "Majesty, the situation has worsened overnight," he began without preamble. "I've identified at least 6 compromised guards, 2 corrupt servants and 3 nobles who are definitely involved. Lord Marcus has been meeting secretly with a Blackmore agent named Colonel Brennan." "How deep does this conspiracy run?" Isabella asked. "Deep enough to succeed unless we act quickly and decisively. They plan to strike during tomorrow's tournament, when the king will be most exposed and distracted. Tomorrow." Isabella felt time slipping through her fingers like sand. "What about loyal supporters? Who can we trust absolutely? Captain Williams of the 2nd Guard Company, Sergeant Morrison, your Lady Maria, and perhaps a dozen others I've personally verified. Not enough for a direct confrontation." Isabella paced among the ruins, her mind working furiously. "Then we cannot rely on force. We need cunning. What do you propose, Majesty? We set a trap of our own. If Marcus wants to use the festival as his stage, we'll use it as ours. But first we need irrefutable evidence that will convince Alexander and expose the full scope of the conspiracy." Thomas nodded grimly. "What do you need me to do?" "Tonight Marcus will meet with his conspirators to finalize their plans. We need to be there unseen with witnesses who can testify to what they observe." The plan was dangerous, perhaps desperate, but Isabella could see no alternative. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. Their only advantage was that Marcus still believed his deception was working. As the sun rose over the ancient ruins, Isabella felt the weight of her crown more heavily than ever before. Tomorrow would determine whether she was remembered as the queen who saved Valdoria, or the last monarch to wear its crown. The castle buzzed with pre-festival preparations as Isabella returned from her morning ride. Servants hurried through corridors carrying decorations. Musicians rehearsed in the great hall, and kitchen staff worked frantically to prepare for tomorrow's feast. The normalcy of it all felt surreal against the backdrop of impending treachery. Isabella maintained her routine perfectly, attending to correspondence, meeting with various officials, and discussing festival arrangements. Yet beneath her composed exterior, her mind was entirely focused on the evening's dangerous mission. Every interaction with Lord Marcus required careful performance. She had to appear trusting while gathering intelligence. During the afternoon council meeting, Marcus presented his final security recommendations for the tournament. His suggestions were subtle but deliberate, positioning loyal guards away from the king, creating gaps in the protective perimeter, and scheduling Alexander's most vulnerable moments to coincide with maximum distraction. "The tournament will showcase our finest knights," Marcus explained, gesturing to detailed diagrams. "I suggest His Majesty present the ceremonial sword to the champion from the royal viewing platform, elevated above the crowd for maximum visibility." Isabella recognized the trap immediately. The elevated platform would isolate Alexander, making him an easy target while creating the appearance of an accident if something went wrong. "Perhaps a more traditional presentation would be safer," Isabella suggested. "The king could present awards from ground level, surrounded by guards." Marcus's smile never wavered, but Isabella caught the flash of annoyance in his eyes. "Majesty, tradition demands that the king be visible to all his subjects during such ceremonies. The people expect pageantry." Alexander, still preoccupied with concerns about Prince Victor's supposed military movements, agreed with Marcus's recommendations. Isabella felt helpless as her husband unknowingly approved his own potential death sentence. As evening approached, Isabella prepared for the most dangerous performance of her life. She had arranged to dine privately with Alexander, keeping him safely occupied while Thomas executed his surveillance mission. Maria helped her dress in a deep blue gown that would blend with shadows if necessary. "Majesty, are you certain about tonight's plan?" Maria whispered as she fastened Isabella's jewelry. "The risks seem enormous." "The risks of doing nothing are greater," Isabella replied. "If we fail tonight, tomorrow might see the end of everything we hold dear." The private dinner with Alexander unfolded in their personal chambers, away from the formal dining hall where nobles and courtiers typically gathered. Isabella had specifically requested this intimacy, knowing it would keep her husband safe while providing an alibi for her own activities. "You seem distracted tonight, my love," Alexander observed, reaching across the small table to touch her hand. "The preparations have been overwhelming, haven't they?" Isabella squeezed his hand gently, marveling at how this strong, brave man remained completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. "I suppose I'm anxious about tomorrow. So many important guests, so many things that could go wrong." "Marcus has everything well in hand," Alexander assured her. "I trust him implicitly." Those words cut through Isabella's heart like a blade. Alexander's complete faith in his childhood friend made the betrayal even more devastating. She wondered how he would react when the truth was finally revealed. "Tell me about your friendship with Marcus," Isabella said carefully. "You've known each other so long." Alexander's face brightened with genuine warmth. "We were boys together, learning swordplay and statecraft side by side. When father died and I inherited the crown, Marcus was the one person I knew would always tell me the truth, no matter how difficult." The irony was almost unbearable. Isabella forced herself to smile and nod, all while knowing that truth was the one thing Marcus had not provided in months. Meanwhile, in the castle's depths, Thomas moved through passages known only to senior guards and longtime servants. The tunnels beneath Valdoria Castle formed a maze of forgotten chambers, abandoned storage rooms, and secret passages that connected various parts of the sprawling structure. Thomas had discovered that Marcus regularly used an abandoned chamber beneath the east wing for his clandestine meetings. The room had once served as a wine cellar, but had been sealed for decades after structural damage made it unsafe for storage. Marcus had apparently found a way to make it serve his treacherous purposes. Moving silently through the narrow passage, Thomas could hear voices echoing from the chamber ahead. He positioned himself behind a crumbling stone barrier, where he could observe without being detected. What he saw confirmed their worst fears and revealed new horrors they had not anticipated. Lord Marcus stood at the center of a group of 8 conspirators. Thomas recognized Sir Edmund Rothwell, a minor noble whose gambling debts were legendary, Captain Pierce of the 3rd Guard Company, whose loyalty had apparently been purchased, and most shocking of all, Lady Catherine Ashford, the king's own cousin and a member of the royal family. The presence of Lady Catherine transformed this from a simple power grab into a dynastic coup. If Alexander died, Catherine would be among the strongest claimants to the throne, especially with her husband's military connections to neighboring kingdoms. "Tomorrow marks the end of Alexander's reign," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command. The accident during the tournament will appear tragic but natural, the structural failure of the viewing platform that could not have been prevented. Thomas felt sick as he realized the sophisticated nature of their plan. They had arranged for the royal viewing platform to collapse during the ceremony, making Alexander's death appear accidental while eliminating any possibility of survival. "What about Queen Isabella?" Lady Catherine asked, her voice cold and calculating. "She's more perceptive than Alexander realizes. If she suspects anything, the Queen will be overcome with grief," Marcus replied smoothly. "Widows often make poor decisions during their mourning period. With proper guidance, she might even be persuaded to abdicate in favor of a more suitable ruler." The implied threat against Isabella's life hung heavy in the air. Thomas understood now that the conspiracy extended beyond Alexander's assassination to encompass the complete destruction of the current royal line. A figure emerged from the shadows that Thomas had not initially noticed, a man whose foreign accent identified him immediately as the Blackmore agent Marcus had been meeting with secretly. "Prince Victor is pleased with your progress," the agent said. "Once the chaos begins, our forces will be positioned to offer assistance in maintaining order. Within a month, Valdoria will be a Blackmore protectorate." The full scope of the treason became clear. This was not merely an internal power struggle, but a foreign invasion disguised as domestic political change. Marcus was not seeking to rule Valdoria, but to deliver it to enemy hands. Thomas memorized every face, every voice, every detail that might serve as evidence. As the meeting concluded and the conspirators began to disperse, he carefully made his way back through the tunnels, his mind racing with the implications of what he had witnessed. The evening's revelations had transformed their understanding of the threat completely. Tomorrow's festival was not just a planned assassination, but the opening move in Valdoria's conquest by a foreign power. The stakes had just become immeasurably higher, and their resources seemed pitifully inadequate to meet the challenge. As Thomas emerged from the tunnels into the cool night air, he realized that saving Alexander's life might be only the beginning of what would be required to preserve the kingdom itself. Dawn broke over Valdoria Castle with deceptive serenity, golden light streaming through the windows of Isabella's chambers where she had spent a sleepless night. The festival day had arrived, bringing with it the culmination of months of treachery and the kingdom's greatest peril. Outside her window, she could already hear the sounds of arriving guests, merchants setting up stalls, and the general excitement that preceded Valdoria's most celebrated annual event. Thomas arrived at the designated meeting point in Isabella's private study before the sun had fully risen. His face was grim, etched with the weight of terrible knowledge. The documents he carried contained sketches, names, and detailed notes about everything he had witnessed in the underground chamber. "Majesty, the conspiracy is far worse than we imagined," Thomas began without preamble. "This is not merely an assassination plot, but a full-scale foreign invasion. Prince Victor of Blackmore has been planning this for months, possibly years." Isabella's hands trembled as she reviewed Thomas's detailed intelligence. The names on the list included people she had trusted, nobles who had dined at her table, guards who had sworn oaths of loyalty. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. "Lady Catherine is involved," Isabella whispered, staring at her husband's cousin's name among the conspirators. "His own family." "She stands to gain significantly," Thomas replied. "With Alexander dead and you potentially removed, she becomes the strongest claimant to the throne. Her marriage to Lord Ashford provides military connections that would legitimize Blackmore's intervention." Isabella stood and walked to her window, watching early festival preparations unfold in the courtyard below. In a few hours, these same spaces would be filled with thousands of innocent people, celebrating what they believed would be a joyous occasion. Instead, they would witness the attempted destruction of everything Valdoria represented. "We cannot simply cancel the festival," Isabella mused. "Too many people would ask questions and Marcus would realize we know about his plans." "Agreed, Majesty. We must proceed as if everything is normal while implementing our countermeasures." Isabella turned back to Thomas, her expression resolute. "Then we set our own trap. If Marcus wants to use the festival as his stage, we'll ensure it becomes his downfall instead." Their plan took shape quickly, born of desperation, but refined by careful analysis of their limited resources. They would allow the conspiracy to proceed almost to completion, gathering irrefutable evidence while protecting Alexander from harm. The key was timing. They needed to expose the traitors publicly while preventing any actual damage to the crown. Captain Williams and his loyal men will discreetly replace the compromised guards around the royal viewing platform, Thomas explained. We'll reinforce the platform structure secretly, ensuring it cannot collapse even if Marcus attempts sabotage. What about the Blackmore agent and the foreign involvement? Isabella asked. Sergeant Morrison will lead a small team to detain the agent when he attempts to signal Prince Victor's forces. Once we have him in custody, we can extract information about the broader plot. Isabella reviewed their plans once more, searching for weaknesses or oversights. Their success depended on perfect coordination and split-second timing. Even a small mistake could result in Alexander's death and Valdoria's conquest. There's one more element we must consider, Isabella said slowly. We need witnesses whose testimony cannot be questioned. The evidence must be so overwhelming that even Marcus's allies cannot deny his guilt. What do you propose, Majesty? We invite Prince Victor himself to witness his allies' failure. Thomas stared at her in shock. Majesty, that seems incredibly dangerous. If our plan fails, Victor will take Valdoria anyway. But if we succeed, we'll have him as a prisoner rather than an enemy threatening our borders. Sometimes the greatest risks offer the greatest rewards. The morning progressed with careful orchestration of their counter-conspiracy. Isabella maintained her public schedule, greeting arriving dignitaries and overseeing last-minute preparations. Her performance had to be flawless. Any sign that she suspected treachery might prompt Marcus to accelerate his timeline or change his methods. During the royal breakfast, Marcus appeared more confident than she had seen him in weeks. His treachery had given him energy, as if the prospect of success had lifted a burden from his shoulders. The festival promises to be spectacular. Your Majesty, Marcus said, addressing both Alexander and Isabella. I've received word that several foreign princes have arrived to witness our celebrations. Isabella's pulse quickened. Was Marcus referring to Prince Victor's presence? Had their enemy already arrived to watch Alexander's destruction firsthand? Foreign princes? Alexander asked with interest. I don't recall inviting any heads of state. Informal visits, Your Majesty. Prince Victor of Blackmore expressed particular interest in observing our tournament traditions. I took the liberty of extending hospitality in your name. There it was, confirmation that Victor was indeed present, probably hidden among the foreign dignitaries or disguised as a member of someone else's retinue. Isabella felt a chill of fear mixed with excitement. Their gamble was about to be tested. How thoughtful of you, Marcus, Isabella said smoothly. I look forward to meeting Prince Victor personally. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even concern. He had not expected Isabella to show interest in meeting his foreign ally. Perhaps after the tournament, Majesty. The prince indicated he prefers to observe rather than participate in formal protocols. The conversation continued pleasantly, but Isabella could sense the undercurrents of tension. Marcus was beginning to suspect that something had changed, though he could not yet identify what. As the royal family prepared to make their first public appearance of the day, Isabella caught Alexander's arm gently. My love, I want you to promise me something, she said, her voice carrying an urgency that made him pause. Of course, what is it? Today, stay close to Captain Williams and his men. If anyone suggests you move to a different location or change the planned schedule, please consult with me first. Alexander frowned, puzzled by the unusual request. Isabella, you're worrying me. Is there something you're not telling me? Isabella felt the weight of her terrible knowledge, the burden of protecting him without destroying his faith in those around him. I just have an uneasy feeling about today. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Alexander said, though his expression remained troubled. As they walked toward the great hall where the opening ceremonies would begin, Isabella sent a silent prayer to whatever powers might be watching over Valdoria. The next few hours would determine not just their personal fate, but the future of an entire kingdom. The game was about to begin in earnest, and Isabella could only hope that their desperate plan would prove equal to the sophisticated treachery they faced. The great hall of Valdoria Castle had been transformed into a magnificent spectacle for the festival's opening ceremonies. Tapestries bearing the royal coat of arms hung from ancient stone walls, while hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the assembled nobles, dignitaries, and honored guests. The air thrummed with anticipation and the subtle tension that Isabella now recognized as the calm before a deadly storm. King Alexander entered with his customary grace, wearing the ceremonial robes of state that had been worn by Valdorian monarchs for 3 centuries. The golden crown caught the candlelight, creating an almost divine aura around his head. Isabella walked beside him, her own crown feeling heavier than usual, weighed down by the knowledge of what this day truly meant. Lord Marcus followed at the prescribed distance, his face a mask of respectful devotion that Isabella now recognized as masterful deception. Behind him came the full royal court, including Lady Catherine Ashford, whose smile seemed particularly bright this morning. Isabella wondered how many of the assembled nobles knew what was planned, and how many were innocent participants in what might become a massacre. The opening ceremony proceeded according to ancient tradition. Alexander delivered the ceremonial address, welcoming guests and proclaiming the festival's commencement. His voice carried its usual authority and warmth, giving no hint that he suspected anything unusual about this particular celebration. Isabella's eyes constantly swept the crowd, searching for unfamiliar faces and noting the positions of guards she now knew to be compromised. Captain Williams and his loyal men were discreetly positioned throughout the hall, their presence appearing casual but actually forming a protective barrier around the royal family. During the ceremonial presentations, Isabella spotted him, a man among Prince Henrik of Westmarch's retinue who bore the distinctive features she recognized from diplomatic portraits. Prince Victor of Blackmore stood in plain sight, disguised as a minor nobleman, but unmistakably present to witness his conspiracy's culmination. The morning ceremonies concluded without incident, and the royal party moved to the tournament grounds where temporary viewing stands had been erected for the day's main events. The royal platform stood elevated above the field, decorated with flowing banners and positioned to provide an excellent view of the nightly competitions. Isabella felt her stomach clench as she saw the platform Marcus had so carefully planned. To untrained eyes it appeared magnificent and secure, but knowing what she now knew, she could identify the subtle structural modifications that would allow for its catastrophic collapse at precisely the right moment. "Your Majesty," Marcus appeared at Alexander's side as they approached the platform. "I've arranged for the presentation ceremony to take place at the height of the afternoon when the largest crowd will be present." "Excellent planning, as always," Alexander replied, completely unaware that he was agreeing to the timing of his own attempted murder. Isabella caught Thomas's eye from across the grounds. He gave the slightest nod, confirming that his men were in position and the platform had been secretly reinforced during the early morning hours when the grounds were empty. The tournament began with great pageantry. Knights from across the kingdom and beyond displayed their skills in jousting, swordplay, and mounted combat. The crowd roared with excitement at particularly impressive displays, their enthusiasm genuine and infectious despite the dark undercurrents Isabella alone seemed to perceive. As the afternoon progressed, Isabella noticed increasing activity among the conspirators. Sir Edmund Rothwell moved frequently between different sections of the crowd, apparently passing messages. Captain Pierce positioned his compromised guards at strategic locations. Lady Catherine engaged in animated conversations with foreign visitors, her gestures suggesting coordination rather than casual diplomacy. Most telling of all, Marcus began showing signs of nervous energy that was completely uncharacteristic. The man who usually maintained perfect composure now checked his timepiece frequently and seemed unable to remain still for more than a few moments. "The final tournament event will begin shortly," Marcus announced as the afternoon reached its peak. "Your Majesty, perhaps you would like to prepare for the ceremonial presentation?" This was it, the moment when Marcus expected to spring his trap. Isabella felt time slow around her as she watched her husband stand and move toward the platform's center, exactly as Marcus had planned. But Thomas and Captain Williams had done their work well. The platform that should have collapsed under Alexander's weight remained solid, its hidden reinforcements bearing the load that Marcus's sabotage had been designed to eliminate. Isabella watched Marcus's face carefully as nothing happened. Confusion flickered across his features, followed quickly by alarm as he realized his primary plan had failed. "Perhaps we should delay the ceremony," Marcus suggested quickly, his voice carrying the first note of panic Isabella had ever heard from him. The platform seems to be experiencing some instability. Nonsense, Alexander replied confidently. Everything appears perfectly stable to me. At that moment, Sergeant Morrison's team struck with precision timing. The Blackmore agent, who had been positioned to signal Prince Victor's forces, found himself suddenly surrounded by loyal guards. His attempt to reach for a signaling device was cut short as strong hands restrained him. The arrest happened quietly, but several sharp-eyed observers noted the disturbance. Prince Victor himself, watching from his position among the foreign delegates, stiffened as he recognized that something had gone wrong. Marcus saw the agent's capture and his carefully laid plans unraveling before his eyes. His composure finally cracked completely, and Isabella saw the desperate look of a cornered animal cross his features. "Your Majesty," Marcus called out urgently, "I must speak with you privately. There are urgent security concerns that require immediate attention." Alexander began to move toward his advisor, but Isabella stepped smoothly between them. "Perhaps these concerns can be addressed publicly," Isabella said loudly, her voice carrying clearly across the tournament grounds. "After all, security matters affect us all." The crowd began to sense that something unusual was happening. Conversations quieted, and attention focused on the royal platform where an unexpected drama was unfolding. Thomas chose that moment to make his entrance, accompanied by Captain Williams and a dozen loyal guards. In his hands were the documents and evidence they had gathered, along with the captured Blackmore agent who had already begun providing testimony in exchange for leniency. "Your Majesty," Thomas called out in a voice that carried across the entire tournament ground, "I arrest Lord Marcus Blackwood on charges of high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and collaboration with foreign enemies of the crown." The crowd erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Alexander stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and growing horror as the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. Marcus made one final desperate attempt to escape, drawing a concealed dagger and lunging toward Alexander, but Isabella had anticipated this possibility. She threw herself between them, while Captain Williams's men moved with practiced efficiency to subdue the traitor. As Marcus was wrestled to the ground, his facade finally completely shattered. He screamed accusations and threats that confirmed everything Isabella and Thomas had discovered. "You think you've won?" Marcus snarled, his face twisted with rage and hatred. "Victor's armies are already moving. Valdoria will fall whether I succeed or fail." But his words rang hollow. The careful timing of his conspiracy had been disrupted, the foreign support structure dismantled, and the domestic allies exposed. What should have been Valdoria's darkest hour was transforming into its moment of greatest triumph over treachery. The tournament grounds fell into stunned silence as the reality of what had just occurred settled over the crowd. Lord Marcus Blackwood, the king's most trusted advisor and childhood friend, lay pinned to the ground by royal guards, his elaborate conspiracy exposed for all to witness. The man who had stood at Alexander's right hand for over a decade was revealed as the architect of the most sophisticated plot against the crown in Valdoria's history. King Alexander stood, motionless on the platform, his face cycling through disbelief, betrayal, and finally a terrible understanding. The weight of Marcus's treachery seemed to age him years in mere moments. His eyes found Isabella's, seeking answers to questions he could barely form. "How long have you known?" Alexander asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd's murmur. "Since yesterday morning," Isabella replied, her own voice heavy with the burden of the secret she had carried. "Thomas discovered the plot and brought me evidence. We had to act carefully to protect you and gather proof that would convince everyone of Marcus's guilt." Alexander looked down at his former friend, now restrained and glaring up at him with undisguised hatred. "Marcus, why? After everything we shared, everything we built together, why would you betray not just me but our entire kingdom?" Marcus's laughter was bitter and filled with years of suppressed resentment. "Your kingdom? You inherited everything. The crown, the power, the adoration of the people. What did I receive for my decades of service? The privilege of watching you rule lands that should have been mine by right." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. "You believed you had a claim to the throne?" "My grandfather was King Edward's younger brother," Marcus snarled. "If not for the accident of birth order, I would have been the rightful heir. Instead, I spent my life serving those who took what should have been mine. Isabella felt a chill of understanding. Marcus's motivation went deeper than simple ambition or foreign influence. This was a blood claim, a generational grievance that had festered in secret for decades. Thomas stepped forward with additional documents. Your Majesty, the investigation has revealed that this conspiracy began years ago. Lord Marcus has been systematically placing his allies in key positions, gathering intelligence on our military capabilities, and coordinating with Prince Victor to plan Valdoria's eventual absorption into Blackmore. The crowd pressed closer to hear these revelations, though royal guards maintained a protective perimeter around the platform. Isabella could see the shock and anger on the faces of nobles who had been unaware of the plot, mixed with the guilty expressions of those who had known but chosen to remain silent. Lady Catherine Ashford, Isabella called out, her voice carrying clear authority. Present yourself for questioning. The king's cousin tried to blend into the crowd, but Captain Williams's men had already identified her location. She was brought forward with considerably more dignity than Marcus had received, but her guilt was evident in her pale complexion and trembling hands. Catherine, Alexander said, his voice filled with profound sadness. Your family. How could you participate in this? Lady Catherine's composure cracked under her cousin's disappointed gaze. Alexander, you don't understand the pressures I've faced. My husband's debts, the threats against our children. Marcus said no one would be hurt, that you would simply abdicate in favor of a more suitable ruler. And you believed a man willing to commit treason would honor his promises to you? Isabella asked sharply. The captured Blackmore agent, now under heavy guard, was brought forward to provide testimony. His confession revealed the full scope of the foreign involvement, including detailed plans for Valdoria's political restructuring under Blackmore control. Prince Victor promised significant territories to those who assisted in the transition, the agent admitted under questioning. Lord Marcus was to serve as regent with Lady Catherine as nominal ruler until such time as full integration could be achieved. Alexander's expression darkened as he understood the complete betrayal. Not only had his closest friend plotted his death, but he had also planned to sell Valdoria's independence to a foreign power. Prince Victor himself, still attempting to maintain his disguise among the foreign delegates, found his position increasingly untenable as loyal guards began moving through the crowd. His attempt to quietly withdraw was blocked by Sergeant Morrison's team. Prince Victor of Blackmore, Thomas announced loudly, you are commanded to present yourself to answer charges of espionage and conspiracy against the crown of Valdoria. The foreign prince's capture sent shockwaves through the assembled dignitaries. Several members of his supposed retinue revealed themselves as Blackmore agents, while others proved to be genuine diplomatic staff who had been unaware of their prince's true mission. As the immediate crisis was contained, Isabella felt the weight of exhaustion beginning to settle over her. The mental and emotional strain of the past few days had pushed her to her limits, but there was still much work to be done. Alexander addressed the crowd, his voice regaining its natural authority, despite the personal devastation he had endured. Citizens of Valdoria, what you have witnessed today is both our kingdom's greatest peril and its finest triumph. Treachery has been exposed and defeated, not through violence or revenge, but through the loyalty and courage of those who serve the crown faithfully. The crowd erupted in cheers, their initial shock transforming into celebration as they realized their kingdom had been saved from conquest. The festival atmosphere returned, though now it carried the additional element of patriotic fervor. Captain Thomas Hartwell, Alexander continued, your vigilance and courage have saved not only my life but our kingdom's independence. Rise and be recognized. Thomas knelt briefly before the platform, then stood to acknowledge the crowd's applause. His dedication and quick thinking had been instrumental in preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of sovereignty. Queen Isabella, Alexander said, turning to his wife with profound gratitude, your wisdom and strength in this crisis have proven once again why Valdoria is blessed to have you as our queen. The crowd's cheers reached a crescendo as Isabella acknowledged their tribute. But even as she basked in the moment of triumph, her mind was already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. The conspiracy had been stopped, but its effects would ripple through Valdoria's political structure for years to come. Trust would need to be rebuilt, security procedures overhauled, and diplomatic relationships carefully managed to prevent future threats. As the immediate crisis concluded, and the prisoners were led away under heavy guard, Isabella reflected on how close they had come to losing everything. The margin between success and disaster had been measured in hours, perhaps minutes. Only through careful planning, loyal service, and considerable fortune had they managed to preserve both the monarchy and the kingdom's independence. The harvest festival would continue, but it would forever be remembered as the day Valdoria faced its greatest test and emerged stronger than before. 3 months after the festival that would forever be known as the Day of Revelation, Valdoria Castle had settled into a new rhythm of security and renewal. The autumn leaves drifted past Isabella's study window as she reviewed the final reports from the extensive investigation that had followed Marcus's failed coup. The scope of the conspiracy had been even more vast than initially suspected, reaching into every level of government and society. King Alexander entered the study carrying 2 cups of tea, a simple domestic gesture that had become more precious to Isabella since she had almost lost him. The ordeal had changed them both, stripping away some of their innocence but strengthening their bond beyond what either had thought possible. "The trials concluded yesterday," Alexander said. Settling into the chair across from her desk, Marcus received a life sentence in the Tower of Solitude, while Lady Catherine was granted exile to the northern provinces under permanent supervision. Isabella nodded, feeling a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but the betrayal still stung. And Prince Victor? Diplomatic protocols required his return to Blackmoor, but under terms that ensure he can never again threaten our sovereignty. His father, King Roderick, was horrified by his son's actions and has agreed to a comprehensive peace treaty that includes territorial concessions and trade agreements heavily favoring Valdoria. The diplomatic resolution had been one of the most delicate aspects of the aftermath. Rather than using Victor's capture as an excuse for war, Alexander and Isabella had chosen to leverage it for long-term strategic advantage. Blackmoor now found itself in the position of owing substantial reparations to Valdoria, effectively neutralizing it as a future threat. "Thomas has completed his reorganization of the Royal Guard," Isabella reported, referring to the comprehensive security overhaul that had been necessary after so many guards were found to be compromised. "He's also established new protocols for background investigations and loyalty verification." Captain Thomas Hartwell had been promoted to Lord Commander of the Royal Guard, a position that placed him among the highest ranks of the nobility. His unshakable loyalty and keen intelligence had earned him not just royal favor but the respect of the entire kingdom. The new council of advisors met for the first time yesterday. Alexander continued, "Lord William Ashworth accepted the position of chief advisor, pending your approval, of course." Lord Ashworth was Catherine's younger brother, a man whose loyalty had never been questioned and whose political acumen was widely respected. His appointment would help heal the wounds caused by his sister's betrayal, while ensuring experienced guidance for the royal couple. Isabella set down her teacup and moved to the window, looking out over the courtyard where normal life had resumed. Children played under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Merchants conducted their daily business, and guards patrolled with alert but relaxed vigilance. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Thomas hadn't been so observant," Isabella mused. "If he hadn't intercepted those messages, if we hadn't acted when we did." Alexander joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But he did observe, and we did act. The kingdom is safer now because we faced the threat directly rather than pretending it didn't exist. The personal cost of the conspiracy's revelation had been substantial." Alexander struggled with nightmares about Marcus's betrayal, while Isabella often found herself unable to trust new faces at court. They had both learned harsh lessons about the price of power and the constant vigilance required to maintain it. "Maria brought word from the northern provinces," Isabella said, changing the subject to lighter matters. "The harvest there has been exceptional this year. The new agricultural techniques we implemented are showing remarkable success. One positive outcome of the crisis had been a renewed focus on domestic improvements. With external threats neutralized and internal security strengthened, the royal couple had been able to dedicate resources to projects that directly benefited their subjects. The new schools are opening next month," Alexander added. "Education for all children, regardless of social class, will be one of our lasting legacies." Their brush with losing everything had clarified their priorities remarkably. Rather than simply preserving their power, they were committed to using it for meaningful improvements to Valdorian society. A knock at the study door interrupted their conversation. Maria entered carrying a leather dispatch case marked with urgent seals. "Your Majesties, priority messages from our ambassadors," Maria announced, her tone suggesting important developments. Isabella accepted the dispatches and quickly reviewed their contents. "Interesting news from several kingdoms. It appears word of our successful counter-conspiracy has spread throughout the region." "Good news or concerning news?" Alexander asked. "Both, actually. Several allied kingdoms are requesting assistance with their own security concerns, suspecting similar plots within their borders. Meanwhile, potential enemies seem to be reconsidering any aggressive plans they might have harbored." The successful exposure of Marcus's conspiracy had elevated Valdoria's reputation considerably. Other rulers now viewed Alexander and Isabella as formidable opponents of foreign interference, while potential conspirators throughout the region found their own positions suddenly more precarious. Prince Eric of Nordholm specifically requests a meeting to discuss intelligence sharing. Isabella continued reading. "He suspects Blackmore agents have been active in his kingdom as well." "We should accept," Alexander decided immediately. "Regional stability serves our interests, and shared intelligence networks will help prevent future threats." As evening approached, the royal couple prepared for dinner with their new advisory council. The dining hall, once filled with faces they now knew to be treacherous, had been reconfigured with new protocols and trusted individuals. Before leaving the study, Isabella paused to look at a portrait of Alexander's father that hung near the doorway. King Edward had ruled during relatively peaceful times, never facing the kind of existential threat his son had confronted. "Do you think your father would approve of how we handled the crisis?" Isabella asked. Alexander studied the portrait thoughtfully. "I think he would understand that different times require different approaches. We preserved the kingdom not through warfare, but through intelligence, loyalty, and careful planning. That seems very much in keeping with Valdorian values." As they walked toward the dining hall, Isabella reflected on how the experience had changed their understanding of rulership. They had learned that a crown was not just a symbol of authority, but a target for those who coveted power. More importantly, they had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in their individual capabilities, but in their partnership and their ability to inspire loyalty in others. The conspiracy that should have destroyed them had instead forged them into more effective rulers. They now understood both the fragility and the resilience of the institutions they served. They had faced the ultimate test of leadership and emerged not just victorious, but wiser. The dining hall doors opened before them, revealing a table surrounded by faces they had personally verified as trustworthy. The conversation would focus on the kingdom's future, rather than its immediate survival, a luxury they no longer took for granted. As they took their seats, Isabella caught Alexander's eye and saw in his gaze the same determination she felt. They had saved Valdoria once through vigilance and courage. They would continue to protect it through wisdom and dedication, ensuring that the day of revelation would be remembered not as the kingdom's near destruction, but as the beginning of its greatest era of prosperity and security. The conspiracy of Lord Marcus Blackwood had failed completely, but its legacy would shape Valdoria for generations to come.